Good evening and welcome to the new Bugajski Hour. I'm happy to be back in Pristina to examine important global and local developments that affect the lives of all Kosovars. And today I will be discussing some important economic questions with our special guests on the Bugajski hot seat. Astrit Panxha, Executive Director of the Kosovo Producers Club, Rea Krieziu, Kosovo Chamber of Commerce, and Besnik Vasoli, Specialist at the Ministry of European Integration. But first, my political commentary on a key international topic is entitled What to Expect in 2019. 2019 promises to be a landmark year, particularly in the Western Balkans. It will be a year that will decide the long-term future of the region, whether ushering in greater stability, security, and international integration, or maintaining a stalemate that could lead to new interstate conflicts. Two outstanding disputes could be resolved if several remaining obstacles can be overcome. First, the Kosovo-Serbia dialogue can move in one of two directions, constructive or destructive. A constructive dialogue that brings concrete results would culminate in Serbia's recognition of Kosovo as an independent state. This could happen through some border changes or land swaps, or through some other bilateral initiatives. An agreement would free both countries to pursue their EU aspirations, and Kosovo could focus more intensively on developing its security structure and petitioning for NATO membership. A destructive scenario would witness the Pristina-Belgrade talks break down, while public frustrations increase as Kosovo remains stuck in an international limbo. The economy stagnates and the best educated continue to emigrate. This would make the country more vulnerable to populism and nationalism and significantly increase tensions with neighbors. The second lingering regional dispute between Macedonia and Greece is on the verge of resolution. The Macedonian parliament has until the end of January to ratify constitutional changes to adjust the country's name to North Macedonia. This would open the door to NATO membership and help propel the country towards potential EU accession in the coming years. Nonetheless, there is still a possibility that the process could unravel. For instance, the Macedonian government may not muster the needed two-thirds of deputies, or the Greek government could face new opposition amidst calls for early elections. In the worst-case scenario, Macedonia returns to a limbo status, and the door to NATO and EU entry closes. The moderate government falls, the economy declines, nationalism rises, ethnic tensions mount, and civil disturbances escalate. Instead of becoming a factor of regional stability, Macedonia devolves into a factor of instability. 2019 can either be a year of success or a year of failure. The onus is on state leaders to take brave steps and act on behalf of the long-term interests of their nations, rather than the short-term personal interests of political power. It's time now for the Bugajski hot seat with our three guests, Astrit Panxha, Executive Director of the Kosovo Producers Club, Rea Krieziu, Kosovo Chamber of Commerce, and Besnik Vasoli, Specialist on European integration issues. Thank you all for joining me on the show. Welcome.
Thank you for the invitation.
We are focusing today, I want to focus, and I rarely do this, I should do this more often, on basic bread and butter issues. In other words, Kosovo's economy, Kosovo's economic development. Remember the phrase in America, it's the economy, stupid. Well, it usually is everywhere. Let us begin at the macro level. In other words, how is Kosovo's economy performing in terms of its GDP, gross domestic product, and other key indicators that you want to mention? Maybe let's start with you, Astrit.
Well, if we look at the performance of Kosovo economy over the years, we had one of the largest economic growth rates in the region. But if you look at the economic base we had,
the starting point,
right. It was very low. That's why it's much easier to achieve a high economic growth. But it was not necessarily high to reduce unemployment, for example. In order to reduce unemployment, we need to have at least 6 to 7% economic growth on annual basis. We didn't achieve that. So basically, the economic growth was mainly driven by the public sector investment in infrastructure and everything.
What is the percentage growth, by the way?
This year is, last year was 4.4, this year is expected to be 4.7. So still it's below the optimum level that it's necessary to improve the lives of our citizens. And when you have a government that is the main contributor to this economic growth, then it's not sustainable in the long term. Because at the moment, what we have a different social security spending, which are untargeted by the government, and in a way they want to buy a social peace with those spendings, but they're not productive. We are in a position similar to Greece in the 1980s, where they were borrowing money to pay for the untargeted social services and infrastructure products, but not developing the private sector that should be the backbone of any economic development. So now, unfortunately, we are borrowing and paying for different social schemes, and that money is being spent on consumption. And we know there's another structural problem that we have, that Kosovo mainly imports goods. It has a huge current account deficit, which is one of the worst in the world. So basically, this growth is fueling consumption that is fueling imported goods as well. And in order to change this structure of economy that is dependent on government spending, on remittances, and on donor money, we need to make policies that are focused on growing private sector.
We'll come back to the private sector and the mix in the economy a little bit later. I still want to look a little bit more at the macro statistics. How does Kosovo economy compare to neighboring countries, Rhea? I mean, how would you compare the two?
Well, speaking of sustainability and a sustainable economic growth of around 4% annually, compared to other countries, we have low public debt and low inflation, which is something that's a positive and has also been known to be a positive. But with respect to manufacturing, that's where we lack, and that's where we have the predominant issues, because our market is service-based. It's about 60% service-oriented, and shifting from an economy that's based on public investment, public spending, and remittances, we have to focus on ensuring private sector development through actually having manufacturing more rather than services and outsourcing. And so the focus would be on how to attract manufacturing capabilities in Kosovo and factories, and reverting that focus from public spending to private development.
And follow up to this, actually, Besnik, is there, you look at European integration process, is there an economic niche that Kosovo can find for itself? I mean, there are many small countries in Europe that have a niche, whether, I don't know, in banking or tourism, whatever it is. Is there something, services, is there something that Kosovo can plug into and benefit from?
I think there is a niche, and I think this has not been addressed properly maybe by all our institutions. I think that's the sector, the services sector. We see a rise in export of services from our younger generations. Luckily, you know, that's a fortune that we have. We have a young population which is dynamic and can contribute to the future. There are good examples of companies that have established here that they offer services abroad. There is no clear statistics at the moment how much services we are exporting, but it looks, I mean, some figures show that it's progressing and it's better, which is something that we should look forward. What we should do in the future, I think we should invest more in our educational system to meet the demands of the market. That's where we're having a big problem, I think, also for future growth in other sectors. And to equip young people with necessary skills, maybe not always university degrees and stuff, but more in vocational education and training, which is something that we lack. quite a lot.
Right, right. Back to Astrid, for most Kosovars, there are two economic factors that matter most, employment and standard of living. Could you sort of tell us a little bit about how bad are the real unemployment figures in Kosovo? I hear wildly differing numbers. What is the state of play?
Well, in terms of statistics, I always say that if you look at, for example, U.S. economy, it's a very complicated economy and dynamic, but it has a simple statistics. Kosovo has a simple economy, but has a complicated statistics. So it's very hard to know what is the level of unemployment in Kosovo, taking into account approximately 40% of economy is informal economy. So you can't measure the economic activity in that respect, and you can't. Officially, it's about 27%, as far as I know from the statistical agency. But is it higher or lower than that? We don't know. Standard of living, of course, we are one of the poorest countries in Europe in terms of standard of living. But if you have informal economy that is not catching all this economic activity, then artificially the standard of living will be below the official numbers. And now, of course, there are many things that we need to do to reduce informal economy. It's mostly the willingness of government if they want to enforce the laws, and because we have issues on internal competition in Kosovo. Now, if you don't have a rule of law, you would have a lack of investment, and many companies will hesitate to invest in a country where informal sector is big as 40% according to World Bank. So basically, the standard of living is not as bad as it seems on official statistics, but it's not something that we should be proud of.
Ray, maybe follow up to that again on the regional basis. How do both compare, unemployment figures and living standards? For instance, I always think Albania started off at a much lower level, economic level, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. How do the two countries compare?
Albania and Kosovo
For
specifically?
instance, yeah.
We do have a lot of meetings with representatives of the Chamber of Commerce from Albania, and there are underlying issues that we both face. And one of them would be the unemployment rate. Even though it's not matched with respect to Albania and there's a big difference in population, I think there are underlying issues that we are both faced with. Kosovo, I've seen statistics that have been differing from 40% to 16%, so it's very unsure with respect to what the precise number is. And as KCC, the Chamber, does an annual study to see what are the biggest issues and constraints to business, informal economy has been one of the biggest ones that we've seen. So it's really unclear what the employment or unemployment rate is due to the informality that's present in Kosovo. But we're here to do our work and try to combat that. So even in Albania, in regional capacities, that's a big issue. But no specific statistics are available for that.
Dustin, do you want to add anything to this before?
Yes, well, actually, you were talking about unemployment and standard of living. I think it has to do with and comparison to the region. I think Kosovo came out of the war. Even before the war, Kosovo had gone through a long period of time where not proper education, investment in education, administration was not done by the local population. It was more imposed from Belgrade in this case. And this has sort of created a setback for Kosovo, which we are having difficulties to cope with. In addition to that, after the war in Kosovo, we have seen that politically Kosovo didn't develop as fast as we wanted. We still have political problems with our neighbor Serbia. The northern of Kosovo is still a problem. So there is no investors coming in because of corruption, because of lack of rule of law because of political problems with the neighboring countries. So this is all impeding, and I think this is why Kosovo is so back from all the other countries in the region. Even though I agree with my colleagues, we have biggest growth in the region. You know, the figures are showing that there is progress, but it's not progress enough to improve the living standards of general public.
Just one more question actually on this European question. How many people actually emigrate? I know there's no visa liberalization. How many young people actually leave the country, either to Europe or to America or elsewhere?
Luckily, the number is going down. Okay. In 2015, there was a spike, officially around 50 to 60,000 people left Kosovo only during 2015. But then the number has dropped. In 2017, the number of irregular migrants was around 7,000 to 8,000, so much lower, and the tendency is to go down. However, this means, I mean, why the numbers are low? I could explain it that also the repatriation from the EU member states to Kosovo has increased, so people have realized that they can't migrate illegally. If they do so, they will be repatriated, so it doesn't make sense. However, the willingness of people to leave Kosovo is still high, and this is obviously very well understood because of these economic factors: unemployment, not good living standards, not proper education, health system not functioning very well still. You know, so these are all the factors that are impeding this human security, as it's called.
But one wonders how many people would leave if the door was open completely.
Well, you know, if they could travel, I mean, the question is how many would not return.
Yeah.
Because hopefully the door will get open. And I mean,
but it's not going to be open for everyone to travel.
Not
we
for
have
everyone.
to,
that's right.
you know, visa liberalization doesn't mean that everyone who wants to travel can just buy a ticket and leave.
Yeah.
You need to prove that you have a job here, you have an income and everything.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
So the number of those leaving will be probably high, but we hope that the number of those coming back is also high, and not staying there.
I want to turn now to some of the, going back to the economy, Kosovo economy, the main impediments to economic growth. How would you specify, how would you list them, prioritize them?
Now, this show is being recorded now in the times where we have these problems with 100% tax with Serbia and everything, and there is a tendency.
I want to come to the whole tariff question later.
There is a tendency to blame all the things because of the tariffs and everything that happened in the past.
Right.
The main problem is lack of rule of law and corruption that is in Kosovo, that is having effect on not only on local investors, I would say more on foreign direct investment.
Right.
Because local investment, most of companies that we represent as an organization, they are in manufacturing sector, and only in the past 2 years they invested more than 100 million euros in Kosovo. So they believe in the system here and they are investing here. Now, in terms of the corruption and rule of law, we have issues here. But mostly is reflected into the bad image that Kosovo has in abroad. So the investors that they came to Kosovo, of course, they had issues, but everywhere they go, they have issues.
Sure.
It's not like they come here and or they went to Macedonia and they didn't face any issues or problems. But the main thing is, and one of the main issues that is deterring investors to come is relations with Serbia. Now, for example, I will give you an example of when we wanted to privatize the telecom. We published advertisement in The Economist, in most of the international magazines and newspapers. Then a week after that, the Serbian state published a negative ad saying that we suggest investors not to privatize the company because it has legal issues with Serbia. So now, who wants to invest in a company or in a country that another state is publishing a negative ad and saying that, okay, guys, be careful with your money because if you invest there, you can have legal issues with us. So basically, or another thing, you have a Serbian Minister of Defense in one of the forums in China. He says that, well, Kosovo is the capital of cartels, drug cartels, and the main thing that they exporting in the Europe is drugs. So even if you had some investors or countries who wanted to bring investors in Kosovo, they would hesitate because you,
particularly in China,
you have issues that you have constant. I'm not saying that our politicians are angels and we don't have issues with them. We have problems. Some of them are corrupted, some of them are working very hard. But when you have someone opposite you that constantly you are trying to put your head above the water, and then suddenly it's pulling your feet, legs, and pulling you down in the water, it's very hard to present your country as a country which is normal to do business and invest in it.
So such disinformation, I mean, the principle is you repeat something often enough bad about a country, somebody's going to believe it.
No, they're going to believe it, and we know that basically we always say that, oh, everyone, this was the case in before 1990. You know, we had killings by the Serbian state, and we'd say, okay, people know about it, the world knows about it. Well, actually, the world didn't know about it until it became huge news. So now we have the same thing with the economy. We have everywhere Serbian officials going and portraying Kosovo as a country that is connected with Islam terrorists, with drug cartels, and all those lies that someone is going to believe into them. And it's really, doing a damage to our reputation in front of investors.
Rhea, let's go back to other impediments. We actually, before the show, we talked a little bit about infrastructural resource impediments. Could you talk about that? Energy, water, so on.
Sure. The KCC, the Kosovo Chamber of Commerce, does an annual study, which they call the bottleneck study, to see the major implications and the biggest constraints to doing business. And for years on end, corruption is actually not the first one that comes up as the biggest issue. Actually, it's informality is always listed as the first one. Access to electricity is the second. Access to finance is the third. And fourth is low-skilled labor force. And the obligation of the KCC is to serve as an intermediary between public institutions and the business community in facing all these issues and trying to work together to see what compromises can be done and what we can project together. And I would just like to add to my colleague's statement, actually, the propaganda and so many of these impediments are in truth having implications with respect to FDIs in Kosovo. And for 2018, it is listed...
foreign direct investment.
Yeah, foreign direct investment is only...
110 million or something like that. It was
it's
the lowest.
1% of GDP, and it's never been like that before.
So it's actually gone down.
Considerably lower,
From 1990, I think it's one of the lowest levels.
Only 1%. Today.
And I think that this can be explained also with, because I fully agree with what was said before, but I think it's also internally, we're not doing a big favor to ourselves with the political turmoil. I mean, we are witness that in the last...
I said we have our part to take the blame for our internal failures.
Adding, yes. I mean, we had political turmoil, we had elections, we had governments coming down, we had parliament almost set on fire, and you name it, you know. And this is, again, as it was said, this is just portraying a very bad image of Kosovo abroad and investors. You know, even though high-risk taking investors would be restrained from entering Kosovo's market. So I think it's both ways. It's internal and external. Also, non-tariff barriers that are put by some of the neighboring countries are also stopping the Kosovo economy from growing.
I want to come back to unfair competition trade in a moment, but can I ask you, Rhea, you mentioned labour. This is something I want you to develop a little bit. When you say a lack of a sufficiently trained labour force, could you elaborate on that?
There's a big discrepancy between market needs and what the education system provides today. There's an overflow of lawyers, of economists, of different professions that are not necessarily professional with respect to what is deemed necessary today for the Kosovo market. So we have to bridge the gap between what the market needs and what is offered by educational institutions, and that's where professional education comes in, and vet schools, which is something that's underway in Kosovo, and the chambers giving a lot of effort in ensuring that not only are businesses informed about it, but there's the ability for businesses to directly influence and affect how those policies are made. There's the idea that businesses have to first inform institutions what they need, the specific skill set that is required, the amount of time and money they would be willing to invest in the people that they hire, and go on from that. So we have to find the optimum sort of model how to help the business community by means of improving education first.
Another fact.
I might add something to the labor. Please. I completely agree with Rhea, what she said, and we always say that we have the youngest population in Europe, and it's the biggest asset we have. Well, it's an asset if it has, asset is by definition something that has a value. So now we have a youth, but the real value is not being optimized at the moment because they're not ready for the workforce to enter the labor market. You know, so in a sense they are more liability than the assets, and to become an asset we need to train them. And what our government did, opened 7 universities around Kosovo, and everyone wants to study social science. No one wants to study technology, exact sciences, even businesses. I'm very skeptical about business degree because you don't need to study business to become to do business. But what we, as an organization, for example, most of our companies, they lack people who are machine operators. Machine maintenance, food technicians, wood processing, metal processing. These are professions that are highly, you have to be highly skilled, but you don't need a degree. Right. You don't need a degree for that. You need to go through vet school, or that's why we are in the process of establishing a training center for our needs. You know, as a business organization, our bread and butter would be finding a new markets, but we need to deal on training the labor force as well, because one of the biggest obstacles for growth of Kosovo companies is the labor at the moment. It's not an access to finance. Electricity is another thing you mentioned, but the labor is, our companies are growing. We need to be more competitive. In order to be more competitive, you need to have a skilled workforce. You mentioned that access to finance isn't a problem. I mean, what is the state of the banking system? Maybe both of you. State of the banking sector, I think in the past we used to have one of the highest interest rates in the region, but with increased competition and some of the policies that were implemented by the government and central bank, and we have a reduction in interest rates. But most of the companies, I mean large ones, because for small ones always access to finance is going to be an issue, no matter where, in Kosovo or in Germany or everywhere, access to finance is an issue for small. But I'm talking about large companies. They can find access. Most of them access to finance. Most of them, the only problem is finding a new markets and labor, skilled labor force.
Even for larger projects, the problem is that the amount of equity required is almost 30%, and that renders them unable to actually go about and finalize their projects. And that's something that's under works currently, but there's a lot of need for effort with respect to that regard, trying to lower the amount of equity required, because it's, if the project is worth millions of dollars then, or millions of euros, then the equity that would have to be based will be millions as well. And it's unattainable.
Yeah. I wanted to ask, before I turn to trade and so on, that there's one question I wanted to ask. The black market, maybe you can, I mean, every country has its black market or grey market or whatever you call it, but how does it impact on the Kosovo economy? What are the negatives of such a sector?
Well, it was mentioned before that the grey economy is around, I mean, it's estimated around 40–50% of the overall, so it obviously has an impact, not just the direct impact that they don't pay taxes, but it's also an impact that, for example, that labor force is not registered as employed. There is no insurance in that sense, like health insurance covering in case something happens. But it also provides negative statistics about, not negative, it doesn't show the real statistics about how big the economy is, how big is the market, so you can make policies that will affect the market properly. You know, so there are these and many other challenges actually that come with a grey economy. Then also, the more grey economy, the more corruption you would have, the more favors will be asked by different government service providers.
And the tax base shrinks as well.
Yeah, obviously. So this needs to be reduced. I know that the government has a strategy how to tackle grey economy, but maybe as with other laws and strategies that are in place, nicely written, in line with international standards. However, they don't get implemented properly, and this is also then another problem in itself.
Sorry, do you want to add something on this?
No.
Okay.
It's just
Let me turn now to I'll come back to the private sector because I want to ask you some specific questions there, but let us turn to trade, because this is in everybody's mind at the moment because of this, the new high tariffs that were announced by the Kosovo government vis-à-vis Serbia and vis-à-vis Bosnia-Herzegovina. Before I actually go into that, can you tell us about Kosovo's trade profile? Who are the biggest trading partners for Kosovo, and what is mostly traded?
Well, if you look at the trade structure that we have, for example, it is a structural problem for our economy because we mainly import. It's the coverage of imports by export is approximately 13, 12. It never went above that, which is one of the lowest in the world. And well, the reasons why we have this kind of economy is because we opened up the trade in 1999 because we didn't have facilities or infrastructure to produce, and the demand at that stage, rebuilding Kosovo, was tremendous. So we focused on opening the economy and buy from everywhere. Biggest trading partner is EU. If you look at it as a one unit, we won't go into specific countries, but usually with EU, we treat it as a one unit. Yeah. Then is Serbia. Serbia was always the biggest trading partner for Kosovo in terms of not exports, but imports.
Imports, right.
Because we signed to become a part of CEFTA in 2007.
That's the Central Europe Free Trade Association.
Yes, and not because we analyzed it properly, our government went through it, what are the benefits and what are the drawbacks. But the only thing was in mind was to recognize Kosovo in the region as an independent unit, not as an independent state, but to formalize Kosovo as being a part of the
economic
region.
Player.
Economic player. So basically, if you look at the list of the products that we protected in CEFTA, is zero compared to other countries that put the list of agriculture and many different products. So on top of that, we always had issues in trading with the regional countries because they looked at Kosovo as something that is a weak state. It has problems in being recognized internationally. So if we put non-tariff barriers to Kosovo, it's not going to be an issue because no one would listen to Kosovo. No one would listen to Kosovo because of its weak institutions and the internal problems they have. So basically, everyone in the region was selling to Kosovo, but no one wanted to buy from Kosovo. Or even the private companies in Serbia, for example, or in Bosnia, or in Albania wanted to buy from Kosovo. It was the state who put non-tariff barriers or any other. It was very controlled trade toward Kosovo, even though we called it a free trade.
Even from Albania?
Even with Albania, we have issues in terms of non-tariff barriers. And so basically, free trade cost us a lot. In respect of not being able to benefit. In order to have a free trade that is beneficial for everyone, you need to be equal. Because most of our businesses that we represent in our organization, when they invested in Kosovo, they didn't invest only for internal market because we are only 1.8 million people. They invested because they looked at the region and EU. So if we start to list the problems that we have with, let's say, Serbia and Bosnia, then we want to do it in one Bugajski hour, but it would take us a week to list Bugajski week, we would call it, to explain all the issues and problems that we have in dealing with Serbia and Bosnia specifically.
Rhea, what impact do you think that the new tariffs will have? I mean, first of all, will they last? And secondly, what impact will they have on the economy here?
First of all, in order to have free trade, there has to be mutual respect of the rules and regulations that govern it. And that has not been the case with respect to Kosovo specifically. And which is why the government of Kosovo was mandated by Article 17 and 18 of TIFTA specifically to allow for such imposition of a trade barrier. And of course, it was a surprise because no one expected it from 10 to jump to 100, but still it's something that had to be done, and it was eventually inevitable. But what has happened is then we've obviously seen a large decrease of imports from Serbia and from Bosnia, and we've seen the business community in Kosovo scrambling to find alternative routes for imports, and that has predominantly shifted to an interest in Albania, Macedonia, and a couple of other countries, surrounding countries. But the issue is that even with these countries, we still have non-trade barriers that are imposed, and there's an underlying need to still have meetings and have MOUs signed with institutions of these partner countries to see that and to ensure that they actually respect those rules and regulations of TIFTA. And so the instances with Serbia and Bosnia are not replicated.
When you say non-trade barriers, what specifically do you mean?
There's a lot of issues with customs, there's a lot of issues with administrative matters, filing, and
questions of
with
health standards and all this.
Certification issues, non-acceptance of certification of origin, a lot of issues with barcodes, stuff that just takes a lot of time, and buying time with products which are perishable is never a good idea.
The most ironic thing is in terms with Serbia and Bosnia, for example, is that when we had issues, for example, we had the products coming from Bosnia being sold to Kosovo, or from Serbia with the prices under the cost of production, which is a dumping.
Dumping, yeah.
And we complained because our manufacturing was saying that we have in the market products that were being sold cheaper in Kosovo than in Bosnia or Serbia. So we complained to Ministry of Trade of Kosovo, and then they wrote to Serbia or Bosnia, and they would never reply because they don't recognize Kosovo. So basically they want to do business with us, they want to take euros from Kosovo, but they don't want to deal in any way with our state. This is a hypocritical, you know. It's like it's something that it has to be dealt. We can't speak about EU integrations. When,
well, I was going to turn to investigate you.
Is
the EU asleep at the wheel here? What's happening?
It looks like that. To be honest, what Kosovo is looking is for an honest broker, and EU is not playing this role at the moment. I mean, recently we heard from the senior officials in EU saying that Kosovo is the tariffs are not in line with the SAA, Stabilization Association Agreement that Kosovo has signed, which is true to some extent, but so does these non-tariff barriers that Serbia was doing for so many years are against their SAA, because let's not forget that also Bosnia, Kosovo, and Serbia, they all have signed the Stabilization Association Agreements that foresee good neighborly relations, and for example, in Serbia's case, Article 5, Article 6, or Article 10 of the SAA, of the Serbian SAA, foresees that Serbia will behave in a manner that will improve the neighborly relations. And this has not, they have not been doing this, and EU was not vocal when it came to Kosovo, to Kosovo-Serbia relations. When we come back to the tariffs, in principle, tariffs are not good. You know, they increase the unit price. Then the consumer will have to pay the cost in a way. Also, many businesses in Kosovo, the main products that they buy to
raw materials.
The raw materials, yes, I couldn't remember the word in English, comes from Serbia. So this, if you impose a tax, this increases the price, and then obviously it increases.
I wouldn't say many businesses. Some businesses, They had supplies in Serbia,
Yes.
but not many.
Not okay. You know better than I do, obviously. But so this will have an impact. However, politically, this was like an outcry from the Kosovo government, mainly to Serbia, to tell them that we will not respect this any longer, this behavior. So this is our retaliation. But also, I think, to the international community that hello,
wake up.
There is a problem. For example, our drivers, apparently, what I heard. But truck drivers would not be allowed to enter Serbia because of somewhere in the document saying Republic of Kosovo, so they would produce, or companies had to hire other drivers. I mean, these things are ridiculous in the 21st century. I mean, all the countries have a common denominator. They want to become member of the EU, not with this attitude, to be honest.
Right.
What are the pillars of EU?
Yeah.
Free movement of good,
and
capital, and people. I was going to Belgrade. I was invited for trade facilitation meeting with the World Bank. It took me 8 hours to get there. Why? Because
you can't fly directly.
I can't fly directly. At that time, I only had a British passport, not Kosovo passport. So I wanted to enter Serbia through Kosovo, and I was not allowed because they told me that you entered illegally into Serbia. So I had to go to Macedonia, to cross into Macedonia, then from Macedonia to Serbia. When I came in a motorway to pay for a motorway, the car in front of us paid in euros because it was Macedonian car. Because we had Kosovar plates, they told us you can't pay in euros, you need to pay in dinars because you are part of Serbia. So then we had to come back because we didn't have any dinars. So basically, by the time I arrived in Belgrade, it took me 8 hours to go and speak about trade facilitation and free movements of goods. So this is
ironic.
Very ironic.
So it's everyday blocking and harassment, basically, it sounds like.
Precisely, and the thing is, we can't blame EU for everything because we had to build our case. We had to raise our voice more often about those issues and say, okay, we cannot go on like this if you are treated from Serbia this way. Because in EU, if you have two children, one is spoiled and one is polite, you will pay attention more to the spoiled child. And Kosovo, in that respect, towards EU and Serbia, we were more polite and say, okay, EU knows our issues and they're going to deal with it, but actually they dealt only with spoiled child.
Sometimes you get
Serbia
more noticed if you do a fit, if you misbehave.
Yeah. And in this respect, I can't say that imposing 100% tariff we misbehaved. We only used the language that Serbia used towards us in the past 20 years.
There are three things I'd like to add to that, if I may. The European Union has been very vocal with respect to state aid in Kosovo, but has not been vocal with respect to state aid provided by Serbian government with respect to the goods in particular. Also, considering that the business community and companies who import from Serbia and Bosnia have been the biggest stakeholders affected by this the imposition of the 100% tax, there's a general consensus of the business community and they're all in favor of this tax. So seeing that they are in favor of them, there's no room for doubt as to the institutions and how the community feels about it. And also, if we take into account the principles, as you stated, of the EU, the free movement of goods, services, but there's no free movement of people for Kosovo either because there's no visa liberalization. Right. So there's such a big mix of issues that wherever you touch, you have so many aspects you have to consider, and the business community has to take into account all of those when trying to make a profit and when trying to have neighborly relations with other companies around the Balkans. So it's there's a lot of things to take into account.
Well, let me ask you, whoever wants to jump in. We hear about import substitution. You mentioned that Kosovo is trying to, let's say, diversify a little bit, not be so dependent on Serbia as a result of this. Could there be a positive from these tariffs that you could see?
Well, I would add, what were these tariffs? We mentioned just a few of them. Because for us, the Serbian market is one of the most important markets we want to consider because there are 7 million consumers in that country. but it's a forbidden apple for us.
It's not a market for you.
It's a forbidden apple. We look at it, but we can't do anything about it.
It's just a store
So
for us.
what did Serbia in respect to trade with Kosovo? It was very restricted trade. For example, they never mind buying potato from Kosovo as a raw material. But when we wanted to sell them crisps,
No.
we say, no, you can't. Why? Because they bought potatoes from Kosovo. We have a very good potatoes, and then they process them in the factories there, and they sold them as a crisps back to Kosovo, where you add the value. And if you look at the crisps and the price of potato, it's huge difference. They would buy a wine from us, but unbranded wine. If you want to sell them in bottle, they would say no. That's a high value added good. So basically, they would buy raw materials and would want to sell you a final product. That's why you have the imports from Serbia are approximately 450 million annually. That's officially, because unofficially it's much higher.
More, yeah.
While exports from Kosovo to Serbia, it's only 40 million. So we have this proportion of 1 to 10.
Huge imbalance.
And this how we did the trade with Serbia. And then they have these incentives for companies from Serbia that if you sell €1 of goods in Kosovo, they will reimburse 30 cents in Serbia, which again makes them very competitive goods. So now when you have low standard of living in Kosovo, that people struggle to make the ends meet, where 70% of the salary goes for the basic needs of food and everything. So now they wouldn't choose are the goods from Serbia or Kosovo. They want to buy the cheapest goods, and they came from Serbia. So that's why our internal manufacturing base, it's not that was developing, it started to shrink. Because most of countries would say, oh, we need to protect consumers. We always say protect consumers. I don't want to sound now, because we have this trade tariffs and trade debate around the world, and I don't want to jump into this sentiment and say I'm a protectionist as an economist. No, we always say that protect consumer, but protect workers as well. So because someone who is working is a very good consumer, and now what we did in the past, we were protecting consumers in Kosovo but works in Serbia.
Yeah.
So which, again, it's not benefiting us as a country. So what we're saying is, okay, we need to protect our workers who are much better consumers than consumers who are not working.
I was going to ask you, and if there's time I will, about the manufacturing club, but let me turn to Rhea. How do you stimulate the private sector here in Kosovo? What would be the key ingredients?
Fiscal initiatives, and that's been a key focus of the Ministry of Finance in Kosovo as well, and access to finance. All of the work with the banking sector and being able to provide for project financing and financing for small and medium enterprises, but also larger scale projects, such as, for example, the new power plant and a variety of other public investments.
Rusty, what role could the EU play in this? Because ultimately it's the stimulation of the private sector that's going to matter here.
Well, to be honest, Kosovo, in this regard, we have an SAA, the Stabilization Association Agreement, which is a predominantly a free trade agreement between Kosovo, small market, to a much bigger market of about 500 million consumers. And to be honest, we have not used this opportunity very well. You know, they have reduced, there are no tariffs, no customs fees for Kosovo products to be exported to EU. Obviously, there are standards that need to be met. But unfortunately, this you know, the Kosovo producers in this case, and I don't mean you directly, but in general, have not been able to kind of increase their capacities or improve their capacities to export. We see the latest trends is that the export from Kosovo to EU was dropping after the SAA has entered into force, and imports were increasing. Obviously, it's a big market, and producers then they can flood the market. That's why Kosovo, when they negotiated the SAA, they protected the market, and this was agreed with the EU. They understand you know, this balance between the two markets, so they allowed it over a period of 10 years. that the customs fees would gradually go down to zero. So I think in order to kind of improve the situation, what we need to look also towards more European markets to understand the standards that are required by EU for our goods to be exported, and then to help private producers, maybe by state or other international community, as well, to be able to export more to EU, and that would mean increasing the number of jobs, increasing the wealth, increasing the economy, and so on and so forth.
And certification process as well for goods to be exported to the EU.
Astrit, I wanted to ask you, just follow up to this, the Kosovo Manufacturing Club. Could you tell us a little bit about who that includes, what you do, and how it's developing?
Well, we were established 3 years ago, and we have 21 members. They are some of the largest manufacturing factories in Kosovo, and we represent different sectors: pharmaceutical, construction, beverage, food processing, recycling, and all different sectors. And we are mainly focused on advocacy issues, be it in improving internal market competition and finding a new markets for our sector. We don't only represent our companies that are members of the club, because if we want to change the legislation, it will affect all manufacturing sectors. So basically, we represent some companies, but we speak mainly on behalf of all manufacturing sector. It's a very dynamic sector, growing rapidly, more investment, but of course we have issues. Ria mentioned some of them: electricity, access to electricity, and electricity distribution and everything. Losses on annual basis for manufacturing sector account approximately 300 million euros, and our exports are 300 million euros. So basically, every euro that we earn on exports, we need to spend to reduce costs on because of the lack of electricity supply. That's why we support building a new power plant. We always say that it will have an impact on environment, but we don't have another solution. You know, someone might say renewable energy and everything, yes, but no one is stopping us to invest in renewable energy.
Right.
But we need a solution in order to have a sustainable economic growth. And now, if we now have a problem with electricity supply, when our companies are growing, they will need more electricity.
Right.
And we promote this brand Made in Kosovo. We started to brand the products Made in Kosovo because we want to promote them internally. We want to make people believe that Kosovar goods have a high standards and good quality. Because we can't sell abroad if people internally don't believe in those products. And it's, of course, because of the competition from abroad and the image that we have in the country, that people hesitate. You know, sometimes bad image that institution has, it's reflected to all different levels, to the NGOs. To the
economy is ultimately perception. Because we have very little time, I just want very briefly all your responses to my last questions, which is, if an American investor is potential investor is looking at the show, what would you say to that investor? What sectors, what would make it, let's say, attractive for that person to come and invest in Kosovo? Maybe start with you, Ria. Very quick, very briefly.
Very quickly, renewable energy is a really good one, and there's a lot of support from that institutionally, and also manufacturing and assembly lines in Kosovo.
Besnik?
I would say ICT. Investing in ICT would be a good sector, especially with what I mentioned at the beginning. Services, export of services has been increasing from Kosovo. I think it's a good area to invest.
Astrit, last word.
Despite all the issues that we discussed,
despite all the negatives,
I wouldn't say problems, but issues, because they can be resolved.
Right.
The bottom line, you can make money in Kosovo. And there are different ways of making money. You can invest in wood processing, metal processing. Most of industries, I'm speaking about manufacturing sector, that are labor intensive. You can be competitive and make money. That's why our companies are growing. They are reinvesting the earnings in Kosovo. For example, only as I mentioned, in the past 2 years, our members invested more than 100 million euros in Kosovo. So Kosovo is good to do business, has a huge potentials, and it's a product that is being undervalued by the market.
Very good. We'll finish on that. Let's make Kosovo open for business. Thank you for joining me on the show. I'm sure we're going to do this again in the future. I really enjoyed this discussion. I think it's very important. There's so many other topics that we haven't yet covered as much as we should. Unfortunately, we have already come to the end of today's show. I have greatly enjoyed being with you and with my colleagues here at RTK. Good night, everyone. Stay healthy, be productive, and remain optimistic. See you all very soon. Miro Pavshim.